Hello, I'm Daniel Robertson, the program manager for the Boys and Men of Color Initiative out of Say Yes Buffalo. We're partnering with WBFO on a Facebook Live series of Facebook Live conversations every Wednesday in September to examine the narrative for young men of color in Buffalo. Joining us today is Dwayne Sawyer.
Good to be here. It's good to be here.
Good to see you, Dwayne. He's a member of the Breaking Barriers Youth Leadership Council. He's 18 years of age and is currently working on his GED at CCI.
Yes.
And just finished up some placement tests and everything this week. So
yeah, I'm low-key tired, but I'm good. I'm ready to go.
You're great. Also with us is a musician and artist and all around just creative entrepreneur, just a great talent here in the city of Buffalo, Edreys Wajed. He just wrapped up a show at the Argis Gallery in the Mural in Niagara Falls of jazz legend John Spider Martin. Edreys painted part of the Freedom Wall, a mural commissioned by the Albright Knox on the corner of Michigan and East Ferry. So welcome, Edreys. It's great to see you again.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So, and it's always good to be in a space that you bring great energy, man.
Thank you.
We'd like to welcome you, our Facebook audience, to join us, join the conversation today. And if you have any questions, comments, things that you want to share, please do that as you are a part of our conversation today as well. So, Edreys, we've been kind of looking at what the narrative is surrounding boys and young men of color in the city of Buffalo, and I know you've grown up here. You're a native. Can you kind of describe what it was like for you growing up in Buffalo?
Wow. Growing up in Buffalo, I mean, things are much different now. I mean, than they were then. I mean, I can say that right off the top. I mean, my parents separated when I was very young. Our parents, I have an older sister, Safana, separated when I was very young. So my experience was one of being a single child in a single parent home, you know, with limited touches and limited experience in connection with my father. I was always really creative, always found myself diving into things. Played a lot of sports growing up, tons of sports growing up. What else, man? I don't know, man. I mean, I really enjoyed my childhood.
Where'd you go to school?
I got to name them all.
We know you can't leave anybody out.
54 early childhood school, 74 Hamlin Park, and then City Honors, and then my undergrad. Well, I went to college at Buffalo State College, so okay. I'm a Bengal alum.
I'm a Bull over here, so you know we on opposite sides of the city.
Bengals and Bulls, you know.
Edreys, how would you describe what the narrative for young men of color? What's been your experience with the narrative kind of coming up?
Wow, that's interesting. I feel like it's been one of limitation. You know, I think the narrative is of limitation, meaning that whether generationally, you know, because there's a family narrative as well, you know, depending on what your situation is at home. Like there's some narrative there as far as what a young black man is supposed to do or what a young black boy is supposed to do, what he can do, what he can say, where he could go, right? Then there's outside of the home too. There's narrative there, you know, and as a young black kid, you don't have control over much of what the narrative around you is. You know, you don't necessarily have control of the narrative, but I think it's a great limitation. I think the bar, as unfortunately, gets set low intentionally because of the expectation being so low of some of our young men. I think there's still threats and menacing. I think that's a narrative, right, that still plays out. And that we're just super duper tough, you know, like super tough. I mean, we're resilient by nature and resilient on other things too, whether learned or not.
That's the toxic masculinity discussion that we were having a couple weeks ago in Leadership Council.
About toxic masculinity.
Dwayne, I want to get your take here in regards to, because you kind of kicked us off last week with the narrative conversation. What's your take on the narrative, especially being a young male coming up in today's society? You're in a different generation than myself and Edreys. So what's your take on narrative?
Like Edreys was saying, it does all depends on how you surround yourself or who you surround yourself with, because a lot of the times that can change your whole way of living. I mean, it all depends on how you do it, and it all depends on who you be with, because those choices is crucial, especially now. There's so much going on within the city, and it's been so much just chaos and unnecessary stuff going on, and it really all depends on who you surround yourself with and what you choose to do, because at the end of the day it's gonna follow you and it's always gonna stick with you. So it's constantly hard thinking about what choices to make when you're outside and what you're going to do or how to stay safe. You constantly always got to think. So that by itself, that right there, that's just one narrative alone.
So, Edreys, you talked about, elevating, raising the bar in a sense for narrative, because the narrative tends to be so low for boys and men of color, what the expectations are and how we're perceived. And we know the dominant narrative that exists around boys and men of color tends to always be negative.
Mm-hmm. So I agree with that.
As a father of two young boys, right,
yeah,
coming up, and one of them is around the same age as Dwayne.
Yep, 17.
All right. What we know that dads, especially dads of color, tend to get a bad rap.
I can see that.
What?
I can see that.
How do we change that narrative?
Man, that's tough.
I don't think you fall into that narrative that society tends to project, but how do we change that narrative in regards to fathers and what fathering looks like?
Because here's the power to me of narrative. Narrative is a story, right? Stories can be written. Stories can be rewritten. So you have the opportunity, if you're given the right tools or the right mentor, the right person, for you to understand that, yeah, I can change my narrative. Like, you don't have to subscribe to the narratives that are given to you. For example, in my family, my mom is one of 9. My dad has a big side of his family too. And growing up, there weren't no married couples in our family. So if I bought that narrative, right, I would never have sought out for myself to say, man, I want to be married, man. 19 years in now. You know what I'm saying? Wow. Absolutely. But it was a choice. It was a choice that's what I'm surrounded by, yeah, but do I have to subscribe to that? I look on the other side of the street where I grew up on Pembroke, on Maple Ridge, the Thetfords. I don't know if they're going to be watching, but the Thetfords, man, Mr. and Miss Thetford. They were like one of the first examples, like in my neighborhood, of people that were married, man, and that were in the house together. Like, so those little blips of me seeing those things just made me say to myself, like, that's what I want, like, or else I could have settled for the narrative that was already written for me, so to speak, So for me as a father, I don't know what I'm doing.
At least you're honest with it. At least you're honest.
I've made a lot of mistakes, man. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've said a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have said.
That's parenting sometimes.
Yeah, right. So in me building my own personal Black fatherhood narrative, once it's written, I can't undo the stuff, but I can make the story better as I go forward. Right. So one of the things I'm doing now is our son, it's his first year of college now. And he chose a college, right?
All right.
Previously, the narrative was my college was chosen for me, right? So in me changing that narrative and that scope, or what that reads out like, is my wife and I had to be like, all right, dude, go ahead, you choose. As hard as that was, right? As hard as it was, we had our preferences, but we had to let him choose, man. So that, to me, is how you push. Now I'm putting the narrative into his hands. Like, right. Yeah, you can write the story. I can write it for you, but you're going to hold me accountable for, you made me go to such and such. Right. You're right. You're absolutely right. So at this point, there has to be a handoff, a responsible, mature handoff to our children and to our boys for them to start writing that narrative, as long as they have.
So, question for you, Dwayne, is something that we encounter a lot, and during some of the conversations that we have with the Youth Leadership Council is, what do you do when you don't have the handoff? That example of a handoff. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that?
Daniel, honestly, how can you deal with it? It's something that has to fix itself. You can't really prepare to not have a father. Because
what was your experience like coming up?
My experience, my father did move away at an early age, so my mother was really the main. She was like both parents. She was my father and my mother. So I really didn't have that male perspective. Like my grandfather, he was a really, really big male influence on me, and he gave me the necessary tools I needed as far as just day-to-day routines and how to do this, how to shine my shoes right, how to do this. He was the person leading me and teaching me on what not to do and how to do it, and how to prevent it.
So, let me ask you this. Edreys brought up the fact that what was the family you referenced?
Oh, the Thetfords.
The Thetfords, right?
Yeah.
We talk about how in this day and age, the communities that we've grown up in, we don't see the Thetfords and the men getting up and going to work every day. These examples that we used to see in our communities on a regular basis. We see the negative images of what the narrative tends to project. So when I picked you up today, we saw who at the corner of your street. Well, I know who I saw, but when I dropped you off last week, we saw who was on the corner.
Oh, Paul.
Paul, right? One of the individuals who's kind of a keeper of your community, right? That was on one corner, but on the other corner we saw what?
I actually don't remember that, but you know what? I will say.
You gonna leave me hanging out like that?
I will say this. Maybe you can refresh my memory, Daniel.
So it has a whole lot to do with that narrative that we were talking about in regards to young men in the streets.
Definitely.
We
saw a lot of them.
We saw young men standing on the corner, right?
And that's a day-to-day average thing for them, because what else do they know?
Right. And that's the point I was trying to get to, is the fact that if we don't have those men in our communities and those men in our households, that narrative will continue to be perpetuated over time and kind of repeat itself, because we don't have those stand-up role models in our communities.
Right.
So that narrative change, it starts with you, and it starts with you, and you've been doing it with your young boys. And I just want to touch on that fatherhood piece before we kind of shift and move on. But
and even with kids that aren't my own. I mean, you do this. You know, you play that role for kids that aren't even your own. You know, that is an exercise in itself. You know, being able to guide and steer young men that aren't even yours.
Definitely.
You know, wholeheartedly, because you just know what needs to be addressed. You know what you feel is the best for us all, because in the end, it benefits everybody.
I totally agree with you. And Edreys, I know you're inspiration to a lot of people just in the city, but especially young men that look like you. And you know, I was on Facebook yesterday and I saw a piece about you, and I actually saw a piece about you today, and it described you as this creative entrepreneur, right? And it talked about your wide-ranging work, from being an artist to jewelry maker to musician to graphic designer to educator to poet, and the list just goes on and on and on and on, right? Your creativity has absolutely no bounds. Who did you look up to, you know, growing up, and how did they kind of fit into your idea of what success looked like for a young male of color?
That, I'll answer the last part of it first, like what success looked like. I had to define success for myself as an adult. You know, I had to define that for myself, because like for me, we talk about narrative, right? The narrative for me for success was high school, college, job, die, right? Like it was kind of that's just how it felt to me.
Live a little bit.
That's what it kind of felt like to me. I mean, retired, and right? I'm just like, so that was the model of success. That it was just conditioned and traditionally what the deal was. I had to find my own way. Now, what was very useful to me was both of my parents are creatives. You know, so as I've shared with people before, like my dad would make the furniture in the house.
God-given talent.
You know, like so I'm there. I see this. You know, I see them both always drawing and things. My mom would sew our clothes and make our shirts and like, you know. So I saw these things growing up. So kind of innately and naturally, just genetically, I have this affinity for being creative. However, it wasn't until I couldn't find a job that suited me, I didn't really give myself permission to be a creative. I became a creative out of having to be nimble at surviving, so to speak, right? Like, what can I learn how to do? What do I already know how to do? and how can I do it to exchange some funds for it?
Right.
So my mom at 14, when I was 14, she bought me a pair of clippers.
I saw that.
She bought me a pair of clippers
well.
and was like, I can't pay for your haircut anymore. Like, figure this out. And I had to, this was before YouTube, man. I didn't go on YouTube and get tutorials. I had to do it real time on my head and then my little cousin's heads, you know, and but that was the spirit of the entrepreneurship my mom gave me that, you know. Then I realized I got so good that I would be cutting people's hair in the basement at school. I would take my clippers to school, went through college, like it began paying me, you know, and I always kept it on deck. And I'm only telling that story because we're talking about what we're passing over, like when we're passing over. When my son turned 14, again, I didn't have traditions with my dad. Like there wasn't no, let's sit down and watch football. There wasn't any, you know, when you turn 8, I'm gonna buy you a shovel. It wasn't, I didn't have those kind of things.
Got it.
For me, when he turned 14, that was the first thing I taught him. You're gonna learn how to cut hair, right? Fast forward, he cut hair. Shout out to my man, Jason Macklin, over at Chopper Fellas, because eventually we networked and we got together. And, yeah, he gave my son the opportunity to do an internship over there. He went to BOCES, you know what I mean? Like he went further than I did as a barber. So now he's on campus at college, being able to put money in his pocket from something that I passed on to him that my mother gave to me, you know?
Okay. That's amazing, man. So we got Dwayne here, right? And Dwayne has absolutely no passion for
anything.
No, he has
passion. I do have passion. It's just as far as artists and musicians.
Not creative,
right?
Okay.
His creative artistry is not at the level of Edreys.
Okay,
all right,
that's fair.
What do you tell people who don't aspire to kind of take your path, like a Dwayne? What do you tell them?
That's easy, man. I think everybody knows what they want to do. I just think that most times, being with all the noise that we are in this world, you know, peers, parents, that nature, like we're afraid to proclaim it.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Like that's, you know what I mean? Like I think deep down that you know, and anybody else out there, even adults, they know what they want to do or wanted to do, right? They might not even see the example of it, but they know deep down when they ask you the question, when you ask them the question what they want to do, they might just give you I just want to. But deep down, they have an answer. So my answer to that question is, you know what it is you want to do.
It takes the person to influence it.
Like, what is it that you want to do, Dwayne?
Well, see, Daniel, okay.
I'll put you on the spot.
Daniel, stay put me on the spot. But you know I appreciate it because put that right there. Honestly, like Edreys just said, you're probably going to say you don't know what you want to do. Like me, I do want to be a technical engineer as far as me getting into the tech field and just, you know, trying to broaden my work degree and just everything.
So that's the field you want to work in?
Yeah, definitely.
Period.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it.
But see, the thing is, I didn't know what I wanted to do. It took a special person to actually tell me or influence me.
That's awesome.
To where I wanted to be. And a lot of people like my age don't have that influence. So they're stuck. And they're stuck at that crossroad that every one of us got stuck at, including you.
So it came down to exposure for you.
Basically.
Exposure is huge. Okay. Exposure is huge. You don't have all the answers, and things may not occur to you until you get exposed to something.
Right.
You know?
It did take that exposure because, you know, before, like last year, in the beginning of last year, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was constantly thinking about it, contemplating, maybe I want to do this, maybe I want to do that. But like you said, it do take that one thing to really make you open up your eyes and say, like, this is exactly what I want to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. And, like, right now, I'm trying to broaden my experience by doing different things so I can get to that path. But, you know, it's, like you said, it takes time and it takes effort.
And you have to give it permission. You have to give yourself, that's what I share with everybody, you have to give yourself permission to give yourself permission. Like, too long we wait, and we've been trained and we've been conditioned to, hey, man, what do you think? Hey, Ma, what do you think? Dad, what do you think? Well, what do you think?
What do you think, right, internally? What is it that you want to do?
What do you think, right? So that's the thing, man. Give yourself permission, and you have to be you have to understand that you're 18. It's going to change. It may or may not change. The possibility is that it's probably going to change. And I'm only telling you because as a creative, that's why I put creative around everything that I do, is because I've been a barber, I've been an MC, right. I've been a hip hop producer. I won't say I've been because I am those things still, right? I just co-directed a play. I'd never written a play before.
Oh, wow.
Exposure. Paulette Harris, African American Cultural Center, Paul Robeson Theater. She's the one who exposed me to it and saw it in me. And I just had to believe in what she believed, just for that moment. Like, she didn't make me believe in something crazy. She just said, I know you can do it. I don't know about that. You can.
I feel like you're getting a mentoring moment right here.
And I'm letting this sink in. I'm
really
have
to have
I'm
like a mentoring conversation after we finish the Facebook Live conversation. You know, we might have some people out there that have some comments. Again, for the audience that's watching, if you have comments, questions, please send them in so we can ask Dwayne and Edreys all types of crazy questions that you guys may come up with. I kind of want to shift us a little bit because Edreys, I got a chance to actually see some footage of you, man, actually going to work and doing what you do and working on your craft, man. And I was just wondering, when you get into the piece that I was watching was you were working on something, right?
Canvas.
You were working on canvas, right? And I'm watching you, and I see the look in your eyes. I'm like, I know that look, because that's the same kind of look I get when I'm on a basketball court or when I'm like entrenched in something at work and I'm like really getting into it, like if I'm putting together a PowerPoint presentation or something like that. And it was like you were in this zone.
Yeah.
What does it feel like to be in that zone, man?
That's home. That's home. You know, the zone is home. And I think that for anybody, even for you, you know, young men of color, whomever, make more time to find that place. Like, we're not taught to go to the place of pleasure, man. You know, again, it's about permission. Give yourself permission to watch every episode of Power, right? Yeah. So, right, that's an hour to have whatever. I've never watched it before, but I'm using that as an example is because are you doing things and making time to do things that actually give you power, like give you pleasure? You know what I'm saying? And that's what that look is for me. When I'm there, when I'm in that zone, I'm not taking directions from anybody, right? My eyes are looking out, but what I'm doing is I'm bringing what's in here out to the canvas. Like,
and you could see it, man. Like Dwayne, I was watching this piece, and he had his headphones on, and I'm like, I wonder what he's listening to, because he was bobbing.
He was into it.
He's into it, and I was like, I know that bop. I know that bop. So, Edreys, what do you listen to when you paint?
So all of my artwork is music based.
Okay.
I translate the music into visual movement notations of my own that I created in color, right, on the canvas. So I listen to everything, man. Like that particular song was Raphael Sadiq off of his latest album.
Oh man.
It was called "The World Is Drunk." That was no. Was that "The World Is Drunk"? Yeah, no. I don't remember what song.
Might be a little before your time.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Raphael Sadiq, man.
I don't know what that is.
Let's take it back. Tony.
Yeah. So I listen to everything, man. Anything can be translated. And again, I work to music that makes me feel good. I mean, you go to the gym. Yeah. I'm sure you have music that gets you through. You know, I'm sure you. So everybody,
right now it's that Rick Ross and Jeezy and the Lost Tapes with the Lost Tapes 2.
I haven't listened to that either. That's 3.
Oh, man,
that's
you
3.
You and Rick Ross.
Okay. So Dwayne, you know, I mentioned earlier that Edreys worked on the Freedom Wall, right? And you've seen the Freedom Wall, right?
My school is literally right across the street from it.
Right, Performing Arts, right? Well, that's the new PA. We remember old PA was on.
Yeah.
What's that? Clinton? Yeah, Clinton. All right. Several of our civil rights leaders are featured on the Freedom Wall, right? Including Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, Frank Merriweather. These are people who kind of push for change and kind of push to change the narrative around people. How is it that these people kind of changed your thinking around the narrative surrounding people of color?
Well, honestly, I want to give all props to all the artists who put in all the work on the Freedom Wall because it's outstanding. And if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest that you go see it. It's on East Ferry, located literally right across from Performing Arts Academy. And when we were in school, we were actually wondering what was going on. And we saw the artists over there. We saw them scoping it out, painting, laughing, talking. That whole experience, we was just watching it in awe.
Wow.
That
That's awesome.
this is happening in our community. Like, it felt surreal because we really don't get that good positive energy often when it comes to being on the east side of Buffalo or just being in that area in general. So when we saw y'all putting that work and just being so focused and showing your passion and putting it all out there so everybody could see, it really opened up our eyes.
That's
especially.
Awesome. That's awesome. You're a part of the history too, especially if you were able to watch the development of it. That means you're a part of it. You know what I mean? You're a part of that history, whether you look at it that way or not. You know,
it was dope.
20 years from now, you tell a story to somebody about, yeah, man, I was 16 years old when I walked out the door and I saw what the dude put, you know, you're part of history, man. So, yeah. So shout out to Julia Bottoms, John Baker, Chuck Tingley. Those are the other 3 artists on the Freedom Wall.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
you guys did an amazing job. It's really, really, really inspirational.
Good. Well, I'm sure they'll hear you.
Yeah.
So Dwayne, a couple months back, Sherman Webb came in to do the community organizing piece, right?
Yep.
And you guys had a chance to actually start to tell your own story, right? And I'm bringing this up because I feel like it kind of ties into the conversation that we're having around the Freedom Wall. And you made the comment that even today still you feel like you're not free, like your brothers are not free.
That's deep.
You care to kind of talk about where that came from and why you feel that way, even still today, even though, you know, slavery has been, quote unquote, over for years and years and years, but you say you still don't feel free.
Well, Daniel, honestly, when we got to the topic, Sherman told us to be open and just express how we truly felt, and a lot of us did. So after hearing everybody how they felt and after hearing their stories on situations where they felt they weren't free or just being discriminated just by walking down the street, it kind of set a trigger point for me. It just gave me that extra oomph to actually say something and speak up on how I feel. And I said, you know, I feel like we're not free because we're not. Well, we constantly have to look behind our shoulder and constantly wonder if we're going to live to see Christmas, or we're going to live to see Thanksgiving, and we even going to live to see our birthday. That's what scares me on a daily, because there's so many incidents and anything can happen in a matter of time. So you constantly have to be aware of your surroundings, and it shouldn't even be like that. We're young. We should be living our life trying to actually make something out of ourselves instead of have to constantly worry about ourself and our well-being.
That's deep. I was hoping that you guys would touch on that somehow, because what I realized is that the other day I had an experience. I still get experiences. I still have them. I still have these experiences as an adult, man. So, and there were 2 opposite ends of things. So I was in line at a store recently, and clearly I'm waiting in line. Like, I'm not like off to this. I'm in line.
Right.
Woman comes around me, it's like just pops right in front of me, right? Now the woman who's at the counter, right? The woman who's at the counter turns around and looks at her, is like, you know he's in front of you, right? She kind of turned around on, like that kind of deal, and then walked behind me, right?
Not a care in the world.
Right? So that's one. Now on the other incident, on the other side of things, right? That's invisibility almost, right?
Oh, wow.
That's invisibility, right? A black man being invisible. On the other end of things, I've walked down the street like this, sometimes dressed like, you know, Daniel. People tripping over the grass line to walk around me. I'm not that big of a guy to walk around the sidewalk. Right. So the same guy who's invisible in one instance is a menace in another instance in somebody's eyes. This is the kind of walk that we have to do. You know, being menacing, being invisible, and still figuring out, like, how do we just, are we doing things to appease people, or when do we get to be ourselves? Like, when do we just get to be?
Edreys, you're going to take me there. You know, we started that conversation a little bit on the podcast a while ago, right? How it's almost as if, you know, you made a reference in regards to me in a suit. I can walk down the street in this suit and people will greet me and say hello and call me sir. Tommy and I were just having this conversation. I wear a suit and I get, how you doing today, sir? Let me get the door for you, sir. But if I'm walking down the street in my sweats, that changes. Why? It's like, and we're constantly kind of jumping back and forth between these two lines, constantly being these two different people all the time, and it's like, why can't I just be me all the time? And you take that.
Yeah.
Dwayne, you had an instance where you were at a bus stop, right? And some of that narrative is part of the reason why you were getting harassed at this bus stop. You waiting for your bus so you can go home.
I wasn't doing nothing wrong.
Minding your business, right? I'll let you tell it. I don't want to tell it.
Well, okay. Around last year, I actually had the chance to express my feelings on the podcast, on the Breaking Bears podcast, and that's the day that I actually got to interview Mo Badger. We were discussing how we felt when we were ever encountered by the police or just anybody in that aspect. And I was telling them the story. I was standing in front of the school. I was waiting for the bus. Got my headphones on, so I'm not paying no attention. And I'm vibing.
In your zone.
I'm in my zone. I had my hoodie on. And this cop came out of nowhere. He pulled up fast and stopped. And he looked at me. He was like, "Where is that?" I'm like, I'm not paying him no attention because I'm still, I'm cooling. And then I look up. And I took my earbud out and I'm like, "Yes, is there a problem?" He said, "Where is it?" He said, "We had a suspicion that you have something on you." So I'm like, "What?" I just came out of school. I'm not doing nothing wrong. And this cop was like, "Okay, yeah." And then he pulls off. So I'm sitting there. I'm like, what just happened? Did that really just happen? And he comes back. This time seemed like he's a little bit more agitated. So I'm getting pissed off at this point too because I'm like, I'm not doing nothing wrong, and now I just feel like you just bothering me just to bother me. And he was like, "You sure you don't got nothing? Because if I was to get out the car right now and check you, would I find something?"
And and Dwayne, that leads me to a point that it's so much pressure on you as a young man of color. Edreys, there's pressure on you as a young man of color. There's pressure on me. Like, how do you deal with that pressure? How do you deal with the expectations that other people may have of you? And those expectations sometimes I feel like are magnified because we are young men of color. How do you deal with that? What do you do with that?
That is the heavy question. Wow.
It's no weight that you can't handle.
Wow. Well, again, I've used the word permission quite a few times, right? And I've given myself permission to be me, regardless of who is looking, and especially in regards to when me being me is not negatively affecting anyone else outside of me, right? That's how I walk. That's how I walk my life in peace and being and feeling at ease mentally, never really being at ease. Like,
you feel like you never can truly all the way let your guard down, right?
Never. Now, I mean, and we don't need to go this far in it, but when I think about if you're constantly living in worry, constantly living in fear, not of myself walking out of my door, but my two children, my two boys walking out of the door, right?
That's a different angle.
My friends, like when you constantly worry, what is my mental health like? To always live on the edge of worry. Like, do you tie those things to the physical and the ailments and the afflictions that we also have as far as health in our community? Living under stress all the time, in the workplace, right? I've had experience in the work. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's outside of me being home, am I wearing the mask? Outside of me being home, when do I really get to
the mask?
Yeah.
What did you mean by the mask? I'm actually kind of.
So
break it down for me, Edreys.
So what I mean is, there's a particular conduct that we must have. There's a particular conduct you have to have when you walk into the school, right? You got to take your hoodie off when you walk into the school. Yeah. At home, you keep your hoodie on, right? Right. So there's particular conducts. There are certain things that we have to do in order to be somewhat appreciated. Not appreciated. That's a
to move and navigate.
Yeah. Just appreciate is not the word, right? I would love for us to be regularly appreciated and respected. I don't think we're there yet.
Well, I think certain aspects of what we bring to the table, like our culture, I think is
Highly.
very much appreciated and replicated and duplicated, and but there are other areas that aren't so much.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what the mask is. The mask is when I walk into a department store, I'm walking with my hands behind my back. Naturally. Like, nobody taught me that. It's a matter of I've been accused of having things or having sticky fingers.
It's so funny
Right?
that you mentioned that,
So-
actually. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go.
We was in, me and Daniel and a few other guys was in Knoxville, Tennessee for Convenient last year. And we decided we wanted to go to the mall. And we're walking through, we split up because we was like, we getting tired of walking with Daniel. So we just decided to go and do our own thing. So we walking around, we, talking, laughing. The whole time, I don't know, I had this feeling like I was being watched.
Mm-hmm.
They had it too because they kept looking back. I was looking back. And we walked into the store. And the security guard, he kept following us throughout the whole store. And we like, yo, is this dude really think we gonna steal something, or is he maybe just doing his job? I mean, but he doing his job too good, I see. He over here following us, literally bothering us as we're shopping. So Daniel walks in, and he literally taps me on my shoulder. He was like, let's go.
Dan?
Yeah. He
already
was
smelled
heated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah,
so,
right,
So he was like, let's go. So the first instinct, we just got our stuff and we left.
Yeah.
But later that night, that's when we had it. And we actually thought about it like, yo, I think we was being profiled.
I mean, we know it when we see it, and just when Edreys was talking about the mask, remember we went to go see The Hate U Give?
Yeah. That movie was...
She wore a mask every
moving.
day. She went from her hood, her neighborhood, her community to
Sky 2.0.
her private school, and she was constantly wearing that mask every day.
Every day.
And you saw what it did to her, right? So that's what he meant by wearing a mask, just to kind of give you a little more context. And we just got a comment in on Facebook, and it's from Daphne. She says, it's like we have to always be in fight or flight mode, and it's very stressful living like that. Ooh, Daphne, you hit a hot spot.
That's
What do you guys think about that comment?
man. Think about that. We're always in flight or fight.
Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you. Fight or flight mode, right? Fight and flight both require what? Adrenaline. They both require adrenaline, which the adrenaline does something to the body regularly. Whether you're running or whether you're worrying, it's the same kind of effect that it has on the body, that it also has on the mind, man. Like, so these are the things that are running in our background processor of our brains when we're trying to just regularly get through the day.
Right.
It's still running back there. It's still processing. It's processing when I'm walking out of a grocery market, knowing that I paid for everything, but still look back. Like,
You got to.
Yo, it's so crazy, right? Listen, I can go to Home Depot, right? And it's crazy because I have my daughter with me. We go to Home Depot a lot, right? And for me, it's like she loves to touch stuff in the store. So I'm like, I know my daughter's not going to grow up to be sticky fingers, but it's like I'm always checking to make sure she didn't grab anything, because she'll just grab it just like I'm grabbing my phone and just walk. Yeah. But not even thinking about if you walk out and that sensor go off, it's automatically, oh, you stole something. It's not even, oh, it was something wrong with we forgot to take the barcode off or forgot to scan something. And subconsciously you think about that, and it's like, why?
Yeah, because there's real deal situations out there that happen. Just recently, a couple months ago, there was something about, I don't really follow this stuff because I mind what I intake in my mind. So I don't read the news and all those things. However, I kind of stay plugged in a little bit. But there was a little kid who walked out of did you hear about that? The little kid who walked out of a store that had a little, like a doll or something in the hand or whatever. Like just one of those things. It's like, probably picked it up, mom said couldn't have it, and probably just didn't put it back and just talking like a 5-year-old kid. It was like a kid. And police had guns drawn on the kid for like a toy walking out of a store.
Wow.
Right? It's just like little things like that, criminalized and not given benefits of the doubts for just being children. Like, our children can't even be children to me. You know what I'm saying? And I posted something last week, I think, on Facebook at the start of school, saying for people to be mindful, especially educators, be mindful of the practice and the work that you're doing with these kids that are dealing with, there was a study that was saying that inner city kids particularly are dealing with as much trauma as a war veteran.
That's real.
Like, as much trauma as, there are centers for people that are trauma victims of war, PTSD. But if he looks like me, I'm supposed to just show up on school on Monday, even though Sunday my friend got murdered. I'm supposed to show up on school on Monday and, you know, operate with, and not have an attitude, not be itchy, not be, you know, agitated. That's how I'm supposed to show up because I look like this, you know? So,
So Edreys, I gotta stop you here because it's crazy you bring up that conversation because, you know, we just lost 2 men of color in a span of 7 days, right? A football coach.
I heard about that.
Right?
Yep.
And then another young man who had lived here in Buffalo and literally came in, I think he came in for the football coach's funeral and then lost his life, I think the day after or the same day.
I think the day after.
And the conversation that I was having with someone yesterday was around the fact that, and you brought up trauma, is that when something like that happens in a suburban community, there are counselors, there are specialists,
in place.
there are people that are at the schools to help those people deal with that trauma, that experience that just occurred. The question that the individual raised up that I was having this conversation with was, where are all the specialists that are supposed to be helping those young boys that were in the vicinity of where that act took place? Where are they to actually help these young people process this? And that's something when we talk about narrative, why is that any different in the inner city than it is versus the suburbs, right? And that's a conversation that we can't do a deep dive here right now, but at some point.
But it saddens me, man.
Right.
I mean, like saddens me, man. That
especially you as a parent, Edreys, right? So there was something, I was reading something and it said that, you know, your son, he likes to wear do-rag, which there are a lot of young men on our youth leadership council that like to wear their do-rags, and we tell them to take them off when they come into the space, right? And we try to allow our space to be just be you, but we also try to get them into the habit of when you go into certain spaces, you know, you should take those off.
Yes.
Why is it that you don't want your sons to wear the do-rags outside?
So my son's very particular about his hair. He is definitely in the wave. You know.
Thank you, Pamela. I see your comment. we appreciate your comment. Pamela said this is a very powerful. So thank you, Pamela. We appreciate your comment.
So again, I had a conversation several times about my son wearing his do-rag. Right. It's a part of, you know, people who like to wear waves. I got waves on my head. You know, I don't.
I had them. That was high school. They go now.
You know, my thing is though, this is about survival, and it's always been about survival. There are certain things that our parents told us to do.
Fight or flight.
Right? Right? So when I tell him that when he's in the house, fine. But when you walk outside this door, there's a narrative outside that door of a black male that has a do-rag on. There's something that fits with that. And just because you have it on, you automatically are tethered to that imagery. Right, into that fear. You're oh, Dad, I'm not going, this is what he said to me, Dad, I'm not going to do anything to anybody. That person who's looking at you doesn't know that. Mm-hmm. They don't know anything about you. They don't know that you go to a school that, you know, that allows you to be who you are. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So thankfully for the school he attended, man, and graduated from, they let him do that, right? Because that's what he felt comfortable doing. And it was about the education. It was about the child finding his way. But outside of that, he's suffering from because he makes decisions now based on, well, can I wear my do-rag if I go? I'm like, no, you can't. Then I ain't going with y'all. Like you're making decisions of where you're going to go. You letting this rule your life. You're letting this rule your life. So we go through those conversations, but he really didn't get it. He was like, but Dad, I don't understand what they think I'm going to do to them. So my thing was this though. It's not only what what a white person expects or thinks is going to happen when they see a guy with a do-rag.
Right.
It's also somebody who looks just like him. Mm-hmm. It's somebody that looks just like him that has a do-rag on as well that makes an association like, oh, there's a thing there, man. Like,
What's your take on this, Dwayne? Because you sit in a spot where you're a young person, and Dwayne, I've never seen you with a do-rag on. I don't think, right? I don't think that's not what you do. But
right.
You have several brothers on the council that tend to wear do-rags. So
right.
You sit in a space where, like his son, and you may not understand where we come from with it. So what's your take on it?
Right now, the youth growing up at this point, us millennials, we will do whatever we feel is best for us. And right now, they want waves. And if they want waves, they feel that they gotta wear they do-rag and brush their hair constantly because you gotta keep it maintained. And a lot of people don't see it like that. They feel like it's just, they're doing it just to do it. And 9 out of 10 of the time, they're not doing it just to do it, because if that was the case, they wouldn't be doing it. And people think to forget that it's just fashion. It's nothing more, nothing less. And even, like you said, even us, youth, to encourage another youth, they think, like, oh, is this dude from this gang? Because he wearing this do-rag? Or if he got this bandana on him, is he from here? Is he from there? That's not the case. That's not the case at all. Some people may do it just to do it like that, but stop being so judgmental before you get to know that person. You don't even have to know that person. Just stop being so judgmental in general, because it doesn't go a long way, because it's going to constantly have you, you're going to be constantly thinking. You're going to be thinking about if this person is safe to be around. And why should you have to think like that if you feel that he's an individual just like you? Why should I be a target or because I'm wearing a do-rag? A do-rag shouldn't have nothing to do with who I am. It doesn't define me.
I feel you. We talked about this on the podcast about code switching. This is no different.
It's absolutely no different. It's absolutely no different.
I think there's appropriate. I won't say appropriate, but there are expectations that we don't necessarily control. We don't necessarily control the parameters on, but we gotta play ball by that. Dare somebody walk into an interview with a do-rag on.
Oh my gosh.
Dare someone to.
Forget about getting a job.
Right?
Well, let me ask you this, and Dwayne, I appreciate your comments regarding the do-rag piece, because when I was your age, I'm trying to think Fabulous and Nelly. Nelly, it was big with Nelly, right? It was the do-rag and Fab, the same thing, different color do-rags. Yeah. Nelly had the Band-Aid he would wear right here, and for us it was fashion, but then it was also, we was trying to get the waves popping too, right?
Right.
But didn't see it with the level of I guess freedom that our young men walk around with them now, because they wear them all day long. Me, it was like I wear it at night, and if I'm going to the court, or if I'm just trying to lay my hair down real quick before I go to the party or go to the mall, then I'm trying to wear it. But something you said, Edreys, made me think about just who should own this idea of shifting and changing the narrative. Like, should it fall more on people of color, or should it fall more on the white culture in the sense? Like, whose responsibility is it really to change the narrative? Because my opinion on this is that we don't control our narrative, right? So if we don't control it, how can we ever change it? So what's your take on it?
Man, give it to me again.
The onus. Who should take ownership of actually changing the narrative? Is it we, myself, my children, my family, the brown people need to take ownership of the narrative, right? That's just my position on it. Example. Freedom Wall. Okay. One person, Harriet Tubman, freed how many? If she didn't create the narrative of freedom, right, she would not be in the books, because she created the narrative.
Frederick Douglass, I don't remember if it's, I want to make sure, you might have to look it up, somebody can look it up, but he said something about when he was enslaved, he prayed and prayed and prayed for freedom, but nothing happened until he prayed with his feet.
Okay.
Right? So was praying for his freedom the narrative that was going to work for him? Or was the narrative for him saying, I need to use these and get up out of here? So I feel that we need to control the narrative by doing all that we can to be who we can, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're still proving to each other that we are capable of greatness. That's, you know what I'm saying? Like, we can achieve great things. We've already known this, right? So in order to propel that story forward, I think it's up to you. It's up to my son. It's up to your daughter, right? To have the narratives and begin to roll them out. You know, that's us. Now, what we can't control is somebody else's narrative. I can't control what you get out of that book.
Definitely.
I can't control that, right? And the only thing that's going to change the whole thing for a circle, to me, is when people start to release off of what their ideologies have been. And that comes to exposure. So we talked about you deciding on things based off exposure, children based off things but based off of exposure. It's the same deal. It's the same deal, man. So when I used to do events, I would make sure that cultures were colliding intentionally. You know, and I always say in every event that I've done, I said, say hello to somebody because that person's in this room because they know me, which if you like me, then you're going to like this person, right? Like, you're amongst good company. And then that just hopefully becomes infectious. We got a lot of work to do still, though.
I like what you said there, man. I
Definitely.
like that idea of thinking, and I wish more people had that kind of train of thought when they actually purposely putting together events and purposely inviting individuals so that we start to build this synergy amongst, you know, cultures and bringing people together. Dwayne, I want to bring you in regards to just that question around, you know, where the ownership should lie and even your thoughts on what Edreys just said before we kind of close out today.
I feel like right now we are trying to make that attempt. Like the organization, Breaking Barriers Youth Leadership Council, that right there, that's that first step. I feel like will start and build that foundation because we're constantly working with each other and working with policy reforms and trying to change that narrative. And I feel like that's rubbing off on each and every one of the members because when it's rubbing off on them, it's going to rub off on their friends. It's going to rub off on their family members because what they're learning and taking back from our meetings is actually being utilized and they're using it within their communities. So it's constantly being changed and they're leading that change. So I feel like the youth right now, we're not there, but we're close. We almost there, almost. We there's a few more steps. I feel that mentally.
Some big steps, though.
It's some big steps, but you know what? It take that first step just so you can keep running. And that's why I'm saying we are taking that step. We're actually utilizing the information Daniel's given us, some of our mentors, we're utilizing it and we're using it on our day-to-day basis.
Well, you know that's going to be your job now, though.
Yeah, definitely.
It's on you, Dwayne.
You're AC right now.
All right? It's on you, definitely. Wow, fellas, I've truly enjoyed this conversation today. I wish we could kind of just keep going.
I know.
Before we close out, though, I want to make sure that I acknowledge Nancy. Thank you, Nancy, for your comment.
Yes,
Nancy said she is listening and she is learning and she is appreciating what you guys brought to the space today. So that's phenomenal, and that's what we want. So, Nancy, if you're still listening, thank you so much. Pamela, thank you for your comments. Daphne, thank you for your comments. Fight or Flight, we're gonna have a conversation about that tomorrow in the office when I see you. But this was it's been amazing, guys. So thank you so much again, Dwayne, Edreys, for taking the time today. Thanks to everyone that tuned in. Join us right here every Wednesday in September at 5 p.m. to kind of continue this conversation around young men of color and changing the narrative. Next week, we have on filmmaker Cory Greene, who directed the Blackness Project. That's going to be a very interesting conversation. Make sure you tune in next week for that. This series has been brought to you in part by WBFO, the Racial Equity Project, which is funded by the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo. With that, it's a wrap. Peace and love. Thank you again, guys, and we will see y'all next week. All right.